a future for our environment go together?
To axe the tax, this Prime Minister wants to hike the tax. First of all, he wants to quadruple it between now and 2030. And on April 1st, he plans to hike it by 23% with the support of the NDP. The tax hike will be bigger than any increases in the rebate, and therefore people will be bigger, the average families in all the provinces will be bigger net losers under this tax than they were before. With Canadians unable to eat, heat, and house themselves, will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to hike the tax on April 1st?
Honourable Prime Minister.
I do believe this might be one of the first times the Leader of the Opposition has ever recognized that there is a Canada carbon rebate that he is going to cancel. Checks that he will prevent from delivering to Canadians right across the country. 8 out of 10 Canadians households get more money than they pay in carbon pricing in the provinces in which they apply. In Alberta, $1,800 a year to a family of 4, $1,200 a year in Manitoba. Even in Ontario, $1,120 to a family of 4 in Ontario. That's money in their pockets that he wants to take away.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I'm glad he mentioned his phony rebates, because $1,800 in Alberta is the rebate. That's what he said. You heard him. Here's the gross cost. $2,943. So he's going to take away $2,943, but give back $1,800, and then ask you to be thankful for it, Mr. Speaker. Isn't that just proof that the carbon tax is just like him, not worth the cost?
Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer himself recognized that the $1,800 in rebate that we're sending, for example, to a family of 4 in Alberta is more than that family of 4 costs with the price on pollution. That is the calculation that is done right across the country that shows that 8 out of 10 families are better off with the Canada carbon rebate than they pay in the price of pollution in areas in which it's brought in. We are both fighting climate change and delivering more money to households across the country, money that he wants to take away.
Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer report is in my hands. Page 3 of a distributional analysis of the federal fuel charge under the 2030 emissions reduction plan. Google it. Look it up. It's on the Parliamentary Budget Officer's website. You don't have to believe me, and you certainly don't want to believe him. Go look for yourself. The average Ontario family will pay $1,674 in carbon taxes next year. That's $630 more than they get back in rebates. So why doesn't the Prime Minister Google it, look up the report, check the facts, and axe the tax?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the first conclusion of the Parliamentary Budget Officer is, in the math, on the face of it, 8 out of 10 families get more back through the price on pollution through the Canada carbon rebate. The reality is, if one wants to talk about longer-term and broader economic consequences of a price on pollution, you have to talk about the cost of inaction. You have to talk about the benefits of investing and innovating in carbon reduction technologies. That's the full picture that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to look at, because he doesn't think you can build a strong economy and fight climate change at the same time.
Mr. Speaker, he's doing neither at the same time. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget, first of all, I should catch that word he said, on the face of it. Carbon tax is terrific. Well, the Parliamentary Budget Officer actually did the calculation of the full fiscal and economic cost for the average family. And he found that every family in the middle class is worse off under the carbon tax. For example, in Ontario, the net cost for the average family above and beyond rebates is $627 this year. How are they going to pay for that?
Mr. Speaker, families in Ontario are going to be getting a Canada carbon rebate worth $1,120 this year. That's a family of 4. A family in Nova Scotia, $824. A family in Saskatchewan, $1,500 this coming year. And that is more for 8 out of 10 families than the price on pollution actually is. We are fighting climate change, we are innovating and creating jobs of tomorrow, and we're putting more money in the pockets of Canadians, checks that leader of the opposition would take away.
Mr. Speaker, here's a very simple way to measure it up. Right here from the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. The total gross cost of the carbon tax in Ontario is $1,674 for this coming year. $1,674. $1,674. $1,674. How much is the rebate?
With record-setting wildfires last year, with floods, with climate. Mr. Speaker, with record-setting wildfires across the country, with droughts, with floods, Canadians know the costs of the impacts of climate change. The Leader of the Opposition has no plan to fight climate change. He's not proposing anything except, Mr. Speaker, to pull away both the price on pollution, which forces polluters to pay right across the country, that puts more money through checks that arrive 4 times a year in Canadians' pockets in the jurisdictions where there is a carbon price. We have a plan to fight climate change and put money in people's pockets. He has no plan.
Whoa, he doesn't need to get angry about it. Just asking some numbers here.
Just some numbers.
Right? So he was very anxious to talk about these wonderful rebates up until a moment ago. And now he doesn't want to say a thing about it. He even gave him a fancy new name. I'm going to say it again. In Ontario, the gross cost of the carbon tax is $1,674 for the average family. $1,674. How much is the rebate?
Just the number.
He suggests that I don't have to get angry about climate change. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are worried and angry about climate change. They see the wildfires cutting across this country last summer that are already started up in Alberta. He sees the droughts. They see the floods. They have no plan. Their plan is to withdraw the 4 times a year checks that land in the bank accounts of Canadians, that the Parliamentary Budget Officer demonstrates gives more money to 8 out of 10 families right across the country in jurisdictions where it's applied. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. He doesn't.
The NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost of food, as we were reminded by a tragic report by Second Harvest that came out this week showing that there will be another million extra visits to food banks above last year's record-breaking numbers. Wow. This because of the collusion of the NDP Liberals on price fixing, that is the carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister cancel his April 1st 23% carbon tax hike on food?
Speaker, as one of the Conservative leader's own MPs recognized, there is absolutely no data or proof to link their theory around the price on pollution and the price of groceries. But if they actually cared about affordability for Canadians, they would have voted in favor of dental care for our most vulnerable seniors.
The opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is just not worth the cost of food. It's not just that 2 million people a month can't afford groceries and are forced to line up at food banks. It's just now that those food banks are running out of food and Canadians are diving into dumpsters. Literally, there's an 8,000-member Facebook group called the Dumpster Diving Network.
Shame.
How can the Prime Minister look those people in the eyes and raise taxes on their food when they're eating out of garbage cans?
Yeah. Speaker, we recognize that many Canadians are facing extremely difficult times, which is why we're continuing to step up our supports across the country for food banks, for programs, and for supports for vulnerable Canadians. This is something that we have taken seriously and we will continue to. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to move forward on concrete measures to help Canadians, like dental care, like pharmacare, like child care. These are things that the Conservative Party continues to vote against in terms of helping vulnerable Canadians, in helping with affordability. He's there to instrumentalize vulnerable Canadians and try and play politics off of them. He's not there to...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that's the best answer he can come up with after 8 years of record food price increases that has forced people not just to food banks, but to literally jump into dumpsters and bring their phones that they can network on Facebook to share tips on how to eat out of garbage cans. In Canada, life was not like this before this Prime Minister, and it won't be like this after he's gone. In the meantime, we'll at least have the humanity to cancel his April 1st 23% tax hike.
Minister.
Speaker, farmers across this country know the impacts of climate change on the food supply in Canada, on the growing and production of food. These are things that we are fighting against by fighting against climate change and putting more money in the pockets of Canadians right across the country. We will continue to be there with support for food banks. We will continue to be there with support for vulnerable Canadians. Now, the Leader of the Opposition loves to talk about them and try and score political points off of these vulnerable people, but he is offering no real solutions for them as we continue to step up and deliver supports for people from coast to coast to coast.
Selon l'organisme
According to the Second Harvest organization,